The universe is a giant, empty, meaningless void of nothing. Nothing means anything. Nothing's going anywhere. Or at least this is what I once thought when I was an atheist. And today we'd like to get into the subject of the meaninglessness of life without God. This is Eric Slawick, the WM Penn guy.
This is Alex Perks.
And this is Penn Guy Podcasting. So this will be the next episode in our series on Does God Exist? Now, I know for me, this is the crux of the issue. This is the main thing that broke my ability to kind of spiritually survive in the naturalistic, atheistic universe as such. So, but before going into that, and now that we're, I don't know, like 200 episodes into this series or something, I wanted to maybe do a brief backstory on us and like where we started, how we became atheists, and what eventually drove us back into some form of Christianity. So, Alex, why don't you start? Just thumbnail it.
Someone raised in very charismatic Black Protestantism, I felt like I got to an age where I had questions that weren't sufficiently answered. And so you start asking the question, well, why should I believe something that seems to be based on pure irrationality and emotion, right? So, if you look at empirical science, as they say, and I'm not saying science isn't empirical, but it can be demonstrated to a level of certainty that I did not think that religion could be verified intellectually to the same degree. So, I started asking questions less about the evolution of it all and that sort of stuff, and more just about who is God? What are we talking about when we say God? Why don't we believe in Zeus or something? All very good questions. And, God bless my parents. They just couldn't answer these questions I had. So eventually I kind of struck out on my own, left the faith of my childhood and moved into Gnosticism, not agnosticism, but honest to goodness first century heretical Christian Gnosticism at the ripe old age of like 13. Before moving into atheism. So that was kind of my journey, because I was just sitting at the family computer trying to reconcile the Gnostic creation myth with evolution. And I just said, I can't do it. So I threw my hands up and I just decided there was no God. And so it was less of an honest pursuit of truth and more, this is what's in the water. It was right when the new atheist movement was kind of kicking off. And so I said, well, I'm just going to accept what seems to be the most logical, but also maybe the sexiest option that was very popular at the time, though I was getting the new atheism filter like 2013 YouTube, which if you weren't there, you're lucky, because it was a weird place to be. So
a mutual acquaintance of ours, actually, who is an atheist now, also came out of that. He calls it the atheist Christian online wars, and he burned out of it too. He would say exactly the same thing from the other side. Just thought I'd mention that in passing. So you came into it, you would say, as almost a typical teenage rebel kind of phase.
Well, yeah. You're trying to figure out what the world means, and you don't want to be gullible. That's the important thing for me. I didn't want to be have one pulled over on me, so to speak. But also I was rebellious. I was 13. So that's something to keep in mind, that part of this was probably developmental. But, I do think it's important, if you believe something, you should be able to say why you believe something, especially if that something is going to form the bedrock of your life and the way you treat people and the way you exist in the world. And if you don't have sufficient answers, I don't think you should believe something. I think that's illogical. And like I said, I don't think my parents are anomalous in the fact that they didn't really have these profound metaphysical or philosophical or theological or scientific answers. They just didn't. And I just said, I'm not going to believe something on conjecture, so to speak. So yeah, how about well, yeah, feel free to ask your question. Then I'm curious about where you were in all of this.
Well, I didn't mean to suggest that a teenage rebellion phase can't go hand in hand with genuine questions. I mean, we are doing basically apologetics programs here after all, and the New Testament's very clear that you should always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is within you, with gentleness and reverence. But that's another subject. So for me, it was the beginning of the story was similar enough. I know in my case, it was maybe part of the reason I asked that question about the rebellion phase is because that's absolutely 100% what it was for me. I was consciously rebelling against my parents. And even though my parents are not, they've never been wildly religious, there was a sense in which that I was raised Catholic. I eventually became Protestant later, but after I came out of the atheist phase, but I was raised with that childhood Catholicism. And then ironically enough, considering what an avid Trekkie I am, Trek kind of helped to drive me away from my childhood Christianity. And I was very proud, and I was very much going to evolve. Evolution was kind of everything for me. And I not only in the sense that I believed it rendered the biblical narrative silly and impossible, but also because I actually took it to the present day and believed that it was we can get into this later perhaps, but there was a strange sense of I was the classic 90s utopian optimistic atheist. That was a time before the rise of modern atheism, largely after 9/11, where atheism such as it was very Star Trek. It was very to explore strange new worlds and to boldly go where no one has gone before. And if anyone has any exposure to Carl Sagan's work, the famous astrophysicist, astronomer, Neil deGrasse Tyson is his successor today. And it was honestly religious. It was spiritual. It was this sense that the universe, as Sagan put it, was evolving to eventually come to contemplate itself, and humanity was moving towards this glorious future. It was an ideology of progress. And I've always been a liberal, quote unquote, kind of a left leaner in politics and a lot of things. So I naturally was lent towards this, but it took on that teenage vibe of that cocky, arrogant, middle finger to the world element, that I was going to move beyond primitive religion and move towards that which is the future, and that which is superior. So that was kind of the beginning of my story. And in the next thought of this, we can go into what life was like out. We talked about how Alex and I got into the void. Now we can talk about what life was like in the void, and then hopefully then in the next one we'll get into what coming out of the void was like. So until then, this is Eric Slayer with the Pen Guy.
This is Alex Burks.
And this has been Pen Guy Podcasting. Okay, this